Sometimes, when I look at the trends of these videos, I find myself drawn not just to the story itself, but to the comments left by viewers. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To see how a story resonates, or sometimes how it provokes reactions that are, well, unsettling. Today, I want to tell you about one such story. It begins on a palm tree farm in Indonesia, a place that seemed quiet and humid on the morning of July 21st, 2016. The air was heavy from the previous night's rain, but by evening, something terrible would happen. Something that would shock everyone who worked there. A 32-year-old British farm advisor named Reggie Peters, a quiet man known for his dedication, was working to improve the water systems for growing palm trees. He loved to wander the farm, meticulously noting problems in a small notebook. He'd been there for 4 months, captivated by the local wildlife, photographing bugs, birds, and animals. Unlike the other workers, Reggie never shooed away snakes or lizards. Instead, he'd kneel to observe them closely. On that day, he set out to inspect the water ditches, vital for preventing crop floods in the approaching rainy season, armed with his notebook, measuring tape, and phone. There's a chilling horror in the way a life can be swallowed whole. I remember reading the details of Reggie's disappearance, and one line in particular stayed with me. How a worker noticed a broad, uneven bulge pressing against the snake's skin, too large to be a pig or dog. The python had swallowed him. It took several minutes for the police and villagers to kill the snake, hacking at it with knives and poles. The image of them cutting open its belly, the mud and fluid mixing on the ground, and then finding Reggie's body, curled up and covered in slime. It's an image I can't easily forget. His clothes were soaked and torn, his notebook and phone damaged by the moisture found near the water. Later, on March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India, another tragedy unfolded. 2 travelers were sleeping in a tent, unaware that a snake had quietly crawled inside. Clare Johnson, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, had quit her job to travel around Asia. She'd saved for 2 years, wanting to see as much of the world as possible. Her friends knew her as adventurous but careful. She researched everywhere she stayed. Visiting Ranthambore was a dream. She wanted to photograph wild tigers. She'd even seen one that day, a female near a waterhole. She was sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train. The camp was basic, but clean. Claire was meticulous, always shaking out her shoes and zipping the tent closed. That evening, because it was cool, she'd zipped it all the way, leaving only a small opening for air. The camp was next to dry grassland, perfect for reptiles hunting in the cool hours before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan. They usually avoid people, but sometimes venture into human areas looking for food or warmth. Adult cobras can grow up to 6 feet long, and their venom is potent enough to kill a person within hours without treatment. Local guides warn campers to check their bedding and clothes. Sometime after 4 in the morning, Lara woke to a soft rustling sound near the bottom of the tent. She grabbed her phone, and the flashlight beam revealed a spectacled cobra coiled just inches from Claire's sleeping bag, head raised. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep, and her bare ankle touched the snake. It bit her twice, very quickly, sinking its fangs into her skin. Lara screamed, waking everyone. Claire sat up, grabbing her ankle, where 2 small holes marked the bites. Camp workers ran to the tent with flashlights, seeing the snake crawl out. Claire's breathing became fast and shallow, her eyes glassy. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way, feeling like jelly. The camp had no antivenom. They put Claire in a jeep to drive her to the hospital, Lara pressing a scarf above the bites. The drive took over 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Claire stopped responding. Her skin became pale, cold, and damp. At the clinic, the medical staff said there was nothing they could do. There's a story I read once that still haunts me, a reminder of how quickly paradise can turn perilous. It's about a young woman named Lara who, while backpacking in Australia, was bitten by a snake in her tent. A nightmare for anyone who's ever sought solace in the heart of nature. Her story, though tragic, serves as a potent reminder. Even in the most idyllic settings, danger can lurk unseen. Later that day, after the incident, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. Honouring local customs, they requested her body be cremated. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided to continue operating, but with a newfound commitment to safety. They hired a local snake expert who began giving weekly talks to new guests. These talks covered everything from proper tent checks to the importance of nighttime lighting to deter snakes. Lara eventually returned to Germany. She later documented her experience on a travel website, warning other backpackers to meticulously inspect their tents, bedding, and shoes in snake-prone areas. Her post circulated quietly for years, a somber reminder for travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without fully grasping the inherent risks. This incident, as awful as it was, underscores the vital importance of safety precautions when venturing into wilderness areas. Even seasoned travelers, like Claire in this case, can encounter unforeseen dangers when humans and wild animals share the same space. It's a stark reminder that preparation and awareness can be life-saving when exploring remote natural environments. Then there's the story of Jorge Cruz. It was September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge, 42, had spent his entire life working in that orchard. He'd rise before sunrise, checking water systems, pruning branches, and teaching his son to discern healthy fruit from diseased ones. In the village, Jorge was known as a reliable man, the kind who would mend broken carts and lend tools without expecting anything in return. He had this habit, from childhood, of working without shoes. He believed it helped him feel the earth and move more quickly when climbing the lower branches. That afternoon, the air was heavy with heat. The sun beat down so intensely that nothing seemed to stir. The orchard had been in his family for generations. On this day, however, the familiar routine would be shattered in a single, terrible moment. Jorge was working alongside 2 neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, near a pile of cut branches left after a recent clearing. The 3 men joked about the heat as they moved between the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge wore his wide hat pushed back on his head and a faded old shirt. He reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to pull the fruit closer. The orchard floor was hard-packed dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows. It was quiet, so small sounds, a falling fruit, clothes brushing against bark, were easily heard. The men, focused on their work and conversation, weren't paying attention to the potential dangers around them. A venomous snake, a terciopelo, known locally as the nauyaka, inhabits Central America. These snakes have thick bodies and typically grow to 3 to 5 feet long. Their venom is incredibly potent, causing tissue damage, severe bleeding at the bite site, and affecting blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. They blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining motionless until someone gets too close. Their bite causes excruciating pain and rapid swelling. That morning, neighbors had mentioned seeing more snakes due to recent rains, and Jorge's wife had cautioned him to wear boots while clearing brush. The pile of cut branches was a perfect hiding spot for them. Raúl even recalled warning Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck. It burst from the leaves and bit him just above the ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge cry out in pain and saw him recoil, grabbing at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him again. Dark blood stained the dirt. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin became bruised and discolored. He began vomiting and sweating profusely, his face turning pale. Raúl quickly tied a cloth above the bite marks and fashioned a splint from a broom handle to immobilize Jorge's leg. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it toward the dirt road leading back to the village. The journey to the clinic was slow and bumpy. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg and noted his weak pulse and low blood pressure. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no antivenom, the crucial medicine for treating snake bites. The staff radioed the regional health center for help, but the nearest supply of antivenom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition worsened. He grew increasingly disoriented, and his breathing became shallow. The medical staff were helpless to stop the bleeding and help him breathe. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it vanished into the dense plants. I've seen what snakes can do. In the Cross River, there was a day when the air felt heavy, still. It was May 2nd, 2018. Mina Belagan, just 19, had returned from university a week before. She loved spending afternoons at the river, often bringing her cousins to swim, despite warnings about snakes being more active during the dry season. Mina believed nothing dangerous could happen in the shallow water. On that day, she convinced 4 cousins to join her. They left their sandals on the rocks and waded into the cool water. Mina dreamed of starting a community project to teach children to swim safely, seeing the river as a place of life, not danger. Her cousins trusted her, following her without worry. The river's surface was calm, reflecting the cloudless sky, but, as the locals knew, something was always moving underneath. The spot they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks favoured by fishermen. The air was humid, dragonflies flitting above the surface. The thick plants on the other side cast long shadows over the deeper parts. African rock pythons, the continent's largest snakes, can grow over 20 feet long. They lie in wait, striking with powerful jaws and constricting their prey. While attacks on humans are rare, they're known to take goats, dogs, even antelopes. During the dry season, they hunt near dwindling water sources. Earlier that week, a fisherman warned Mina's uncle about a large python sunning itself on a nearby log. Children were told to stay out of the water until the rains came. But Mina insisted the shallow bend was safe. She had been in the water almost an hour when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was a branch, but then it curved, moving silently. Fear spread. The shape moved quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed, its jaws locking onto Mina's side as its body coiled around her. Her cousins screamed as the snake tightened its grip, forcing the air from her lungs. The water churned as Mina fought, then went still as the python dragged her deeper. The children ran to the village, screaming for help. It took the men several minutes to grab their knives and reach the river. By then, the snake had pulled Mina deeper. The men waded in, slashing at the python until it finally released her. They pulled her onto the muddy bank. She had been underwater for too long. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips blue. The villagers tried pressing on her chest, blowing air into her mouth. Water and mud mixed under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene. Their efforts continued for minutes, but there was no sign of life. Mina's body was placed on a mat. The villagers gathered in silence. For weeks, the riverbend remained empty, the area considered cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially when animals seek water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning, as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies. Even smaller creatures can pose a deadly threat. I remember reading about Jorge and the aftermath of what happened to him. His flip phone and work notebook were found, stained but returned to his family. A traveling veterinarian came to the village, bringing antivenom and teaching basic emergency response. He showed them how to make splints, apply press bandages, and when to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up the brush pile area and marked the spot where Jorge was bitten. His wife began wearing his hat during harvest, a visible reminder. The lime trees continued to produce fruit, and each harvest season began with a reminder to be careful. I sometimes think about how easily expertise can be undone by a single moment, how years of steady practice can vanish in an instant. I've read countless reports about accidents, and they often share a common thread: a skilled person, a familiar task, and a sudden, unexpected shift. I was reading about a man named Sammy, a seasoned snake handler at a festival. He was steady, experienced, and generous with his knowledge, preferring to teach new volunteers hands-on. He knew experience could reduce danger, and the local people trusted him. But this year, the festival was more crowded, the schedule tighter. Sammy, moving between snake pits all morning, had skipped breakfast and felt tired, attributing it to the heat. His colleagues urged him to rest, but he kept working, feeling responsible. The setup wasn't ideal. Cramped snake pits surrounded by temporary barriers, the air thick with fried food and car exhaust, volunteers standing in the sun. The design prioritized visibility for the audience, reducing space for handlers and limiting opportunities to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, strong pit vipers, can strike with surprising reach, and even skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is already upset or stressed. Earlier that day, organizers had reminded everyone to take breaks, prompted by a small accident in the morning. Medical personnel were standing by with antivenom. Sammy heard the warnings, but the crowd drew him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback, stepped into the pit, and lifted the snake with practiced ease. The crowd relaxed, calmed by his presence. But then the snake twisted sharply under stress, lunged forward, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled he was Mac, but his face turned red, sweat beading on his forehead. He kept talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling moved past his elbow toward his shoulder, the skin darkening with bruising. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent. Paramedics applied press, started IV fluids, and administered antivenom. His breathing turned shallow, his skin cold and blotched. Despite the fast treatment, his blood press collapsed and his pulse faded. Witnesses recalled the frantic attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting medics to review emergency procedures. A younger relative began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over putting on a show. The festival board documented the incident, creating a checklist for demonstrations, handling time, required breaks, and a fast evacuation plan. I also came across a different story, a disturbing one set in the rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, March 15, 2016. Hidden near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp served as an illegal primate research station. Erica Winslow, a former wildlife photographer, had been operating the facility for 3 years after her permits expired. She refused to surrender Caesar, an 18-year-old Western lowland gorilla. Her demanding personality had made her notorious, and she relied on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods to care for Caesar. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline him using intimidation. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, and local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night. Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands. The Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. I've seen the aftermath of these tragedies too many times. Warning signs, always warning signs, mounting for months, ignored or dismissed until it's too late. Consider the case of Erica in Cameroon. She was working with a western lowland gorilla named Caesar. These are magnificent creatures, immensely powerful, with the strength of perhaps 10 humans in their adult males. Their hands can crush, their teeth can tear. They are generally peaceful in the wild, but captivity, that can change everything. Caesar, you see, had been showing signs of psychological distress. He wasn't getting the specialized care he needed. And Erica, in a moment of what must have been intense frustration, made a fatal decision. She grabbed a makeshift electric prod and entered Caesar's enclos after he refused to go into his night quarters. I can only imagine what went through her head in those last moments. As she stepped inside, wielding the prod, Caesar exploded. He charged, a 375-pound silverback moving with terrifying speed. He slammed into her chest, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut into her back. Then his hands grabbed her face, thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. His jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Her screams, they say, echoed across the rainforest. He crushed 3 fingers on her right hand, then lifted her body and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated. He slammed her face into the concrete floor, shattering her nose. Then he twisted her leg, snapping her femur. He brought both fists down on her rib cage, cracking 6 ribs, puncturing her lungs. Finally, he squeezed her head between his palms until her skull cracked. Her body went limp. Caesar sat calmly beside her lifeless body for hours, grooming blood from his hands. The scene was discovered the next morning. The aftermath, as always, was a wave of investigations, debates about illegal wildlife facilities, the dangers they pose. Erica's family released a statement, acknowledging the inherent risks. Now let me tell you about another family, the Prices, and their camping trip along Idaho's Salmon River on July 22, 2017. They had a most unusual family member with them, a mountain cougar cub named Scout. It's a mistake to believe you can domesticate a wild animal, even through years of care. I've seen it time and again in my research. Cougars, for example, retain every bit of their wild instincts, no matter how they're raised. And those instincts only intensify when they're in unfamiliar places, where their sense of territory kicks into high gear. I remember reading about a man named Landon, who made a fatal error based on this very misunderstanding. He decided to let Scout, his 3-year-old cougar, out of her crate to stretch and explore. He thought Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed her wild nature, that he could treat this predator like an oversized house cat. As his family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged and immediately began surveying the unfamiliar surroundings. Her tawny coat blended perfectly with the brush. Her yellow eyes methodically scanned the area, cataloguing every movement, every sound. Then Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers. That's when the 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts fully activated. Scout's pupils dilated as she crouched low behind a fallen log, her powerful muscles coiling. Her tail began twitching, that telltale hunting sign, as she calculated the distance and timing. In complete silence, Scout launched herself, covering 20 feet in a single explosive leap. Her powerful body struck Landon squarely in the back. The cougar's 4-inch claws sank deep into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip struggling prey and prevent escape. Then, her jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with horrifying precision. Her canine teeth, evolved for this specific killing technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae and severed his spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down. Landon couldn't move his arms. His face was submerged. He drowned within 90 seconds. His body went completely limp as Scout maintained her grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming to when her prey was thoroughly subdued before feeding. The cougar then dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, caching her kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah, Landon's wife, grabbed their children, Emma and Jake, and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck. They waited there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities immediately launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose. Another case that comes to mind took place on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch property in South Texas, a place where endless mesquite trees dotted the landscape under a star-filled sky. The remote 50-acre estate sat miles from the nearest neighbor, providing the perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, complete with reinforced enclose and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. Four years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality and desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily over the past week. Luna had been refusing all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls in a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors living miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside during the night hours. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines with muscular bodies, built for explosive power, and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of pres per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, Jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them one of the most efficient predators in the animal kingdom. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30x40 foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest with terrific force. I've often found that the most horrific events are the ones that linger in my mind the longest. The story of Marcus is one of those. A man attacked in his own backyard by a jaguar named Luna. It's a brutal reminder of the wildness that can never truly be tamed. Luna, with the force of a battering ram, sent Marcus crashing backward onto the concrete floor, his flashlight skittering away into the darkness. She immediately went for the kill, her jaws locking around Marcus's throat with surgical precision, her canine teeth penetrating deep into the soft tissue. The jaguar's bite force of 1500 lb per square inch crushed Marcus's windpipe instantly, cutting off his air supply completely. Her teeth simultaneously severed both carotid arteries, causing massive blood loss and an immediate drop in blood pressure. The combination of crushed airways and severed blood vessels caused Marcus to lose consciousness within 30 seconds. Luna maintained her throat grip for 3 full minutes, following her natural instinct to prey was completely subdued before feeding. Once satisfied that Marcus was dead, she released her hold and began her feeding behavior, starting with the soft tissue of his abdomen. Her powerful jaws easily crushed through ribs to access internal organs. Her razor-sharp teeth made quick work of muscle and bone as she consumed her kill. Lisa discovered the horrific scene the following morning when she came to feed the animals. Luna sat calmly in the corner of her enclosure, methodically grooming blood from her paws and face. Marcus's partially consumed body lay in the center of the pen, a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership in Texas. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators as pets, urging others to learn from their tragic loss. Then there's the case of Brianna Ellis. It was June 14, 2018, in the suburban neighborhood of Homestead, Florida, where manicured lawns and palm trees created a deceptively peaceful setting. Behind a modest rental house sat an elaborate backyard pond system, 40 as 60 feet of artificially maintained water, that had become home to one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, had been using this location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin Torres, a 27-year-old photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a 25-year-old social media influencer who had rented the house specifically for its unique backyard feature. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus from a failing roadside attraction that was being shut down by authorities. The 9-foot American alligator had been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions, prompting Brianna's decision to relocate him to what she believed was a better environment. Her academic knowledge of reptilian behavior had convinced her that she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. Amanda's landlord remained completely unaware that a 350 lb apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friends' protests, Brianna had continued hand-feeding the massive reptile, believing her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors had been complaining about strange splashing sounds echoing through the night, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. These apex predators are ambush hunters by nature, capable of explosive bursts of speed. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting over the suburban landscape. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and the waterlogged instruments needed to be retrieved manually. Despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself to recover the expensive scientific equipment. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, completely focused on the task, and unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw press of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350 lbd body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency. His jaws clamped down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her ribcage. I've spent years studying the strange, often tragic intersection of humans and the wild. Sometimes the stories haunt me for weeks. The case of Brutus, the alligator, is one of those stories. He dragged Brianna toward the deeper section of the pond, holding her underwater with relentless determination until all movement ceased. The following day, Brutus had retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill. Local authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the illegal possession of the dangerous reptile, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture and relocate Brutus. The incident prompted immediate changes to local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas. It was October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, where towering evergreens stretched endlessly toward gray autumn skies. "15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among dense forest, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture, and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. With adult males capable of reaching speeds of 30 meter/s and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds, their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of prise per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls. Their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours, when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully, in the corner of the 15x20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. I've always been drawn to stories where humans try to bridge the gap between themselves and the wild. Sometimes those bridges collapse in the most tragic ways. There was the case of Kodiak, the black bear illegally kept, and then tranquilized and moved to a sanctuary. But the case I keep returning to happened on March 22, 2015, just outside Houston, Texas. The air that day was thick, heavy with humidity. Inside a chain-link enclos, behind a small ranch-style house, a Bengal tiger paced restlessly. The owner was Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic, a man who preferred the company of engines to people. He'd lived alone since his divorce, spending his time fixing up old cars and caring for his collection of animals. It started small, ball pythons, iguanas. Then came a serval. And finally, Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger acquired from a private breeder near San Antonio. Michael kept Raja in a large enclos, reinforced with steel and heavy wire. Neighbors would sometimes see him walking beside the tiger, a chain lead in his hand, talking to it like a companion. He genuinely believed Raja recognized his scent, his tone. He even claimed the animal would never hurt him. When a friend asked why he took such a risk, Michael simply shrugged. It was about trust, he said, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky. The enclosure smelled of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by to borrow a socket wrench and stayed to watch as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raya was pacing more than usual, tail lashing, eyes following every movement. Construction noise from a nearby property filled the air, the clanging of metal, the hum of machinery. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds, but would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators, capable of crushing bone with a bite exceeding 1,000 pounds of prees. Even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts, stalking, ambushing, using sudden force. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with enough power to shatter ribs. Their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement itself is often the trigger. Luis stood about 20 yards away, leaning against the fence, as Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. For convenience, he left the outer gate partially open so he could move a wheelbarrow through more easily. It wasn't the first time he'd done it. Luis later recounted that as Michael worked, Raja continued pacing, muscles tensing with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up once, muttered something under his breath, and bent again to lift a shovel. Luis told investigators he saw the tiger freeze mid-stride. Its ears flattened, body crouched low to the ground, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him flat on his back. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed in 2 strides and clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted and threw a wrench, but it clattered uselessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel's handle upward, striking Raja's snout once, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Luis grabbed handfuls of gravel and hurled them, screaming for the tiger to stop. But Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Dispatchers logged the call at 5:42 p.m. When deputies arrived 10 minutes later, they held position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, one officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable from the first strike. Investigators noted that despite his experience, Michael had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier, or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. His funeral was attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside was still stained dark where the attack happened. Another case, equally unsettling, unfolded on January the 14th, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. The morning air hung heavy with humidity. Behind a low row of warehouses, one lot stood apart. Quiet, except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. Ahmad Firdos was 34, an auto parts importer. To most, he seemed patient and meticulous. But his fascination with exotic animals was no secret. Years earlier, during a trip to Flores, he had been captivated by the Komodo dragon, its slow, deliberate movements, the quiet dominance in its stare. When an acquaintance from the wildlife trade offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete. I've often wondered about the moment trust turns to instinct, when a bond forged over years can shatter in an instant. I've seen it in the archives, read about it in countless reports, and the details always leave me unsettled. It's a fragile line, and sometimes the consequences are irreversible. That Thursday morning in Indonesia, the air hung heavy with the smell of diesel. Ahmad, who worked at a warehouse, had skipped feeding his Komodo dragon the previous evening. He'd been distracted by a problem with a shipment. By sunrise, he noticed the dragon's water basin was overturned and filthy, and, wanting to clean it before the day's work began, he opened the enclos. The dragon was in the far corner, motionless. These creatures, I know, can grow up to 10 feet long, and their bite is strong enough to crush bone. Their venom contains anticoagulants and toxins that cause rapid blood loss. They are ambush predators, capable of surprising bursts of speed. In captivity, they can become defensive if handled frequently or underfed. Yudi, another worker, heard a clang of metal and a low thud, followed by a sharp cry. He ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his right calf, teeth sunk deep. Blood darkened the concrete. Ahmad kicked out, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, its head jerking back before it lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and swung hard, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping across the floor. Its throat bulged with each breath, saliva stringing from its jaws. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a thick smear of blood. The dragon lunged once more, catching his side just below the ribs. Teeth sank deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a gasping rasp. Yudi struck again and again, until the creature finally backed off a few feet. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red, the smell of iron thick in the humid air. Yudi ran to the gate, dragging a burlap sack from a supply shelf. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged toward the sack, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was already gone. Later reports confirmed multiple deep lacerations to the leg, arm, and abdomen, with significant internal bleeding. Death was attributed to massive exsanguination and traumatic shock from the venom's anticoagulant effects. Veterinarians who examined the animal later said it had shown signs of food aggression, behavior triggered when prey or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, measuring just under 7 feet and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation centre. Officials identified it as originating from Rinca Island, confirming it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story barely made the local newspapers. Neighbours remembered Ahmad as generous, sponsoring youth football games and handing out bottled water to delivery drivers. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated quietly, a warning told in fragments. Those who had seen the pen said he treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. On May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana, the morning was clear and still. A line of spruce trees framed the small animal sanctuary Mark Jennings had built. Inside, one enclosure stood larger than the rest, its occupant pacing slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. Mark Jennings was 49, a former wildlife handler for film productions. He had left the industry in his 30s to start an educational sanctuary outside Bozeman. He ran school tours, wildlife demonstrations, and rescue programs for injured raptors and foxes. His pride was a 1,000-pound brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub after being orphaned during a legal hunt in Alaska. To Mark, Bruno represented proof that wild animals could bond with humans through trust rather than fear. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years. He was intelligent, food-driven, and typically calm around people he knew. The enclosure was spacious with reinforced fencing, a pond, and a shaded feeding platform. Mark managed most care himself, but occasionally brought in help. Aaron Cole was one of those helpers, a licensed trainer who had worked with Bruno multiple times without issue. She followed protocols carefully, but admitted she always kept her distance during feeding. Mark trusted her completely, enough to call her one of the few people Bruno recognized. Brown bears of Kodiak lineage are among the largest terrestrial carnivores, capable of standing over 9 feet tall and delivering a bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. While generally solitary and predictable in the wild, captivity can alter their tolerance thresholds. Even long-term handlers face risk if food, scent, or routine changes. During feeding, aggression can surface suddenly, triggered by... I've always been drawn to the moments when the wild world collides with our own, often with tragic consequences. Consider the story of Bruno, a bear in a sanctuary, and the day everything went wrong. It's a stark reminder of the power these creatures possess and the respect they demand. The sanctuary was nestled in rolling pasture land, bordered by pines. It was early summer, and the air was thick with the smell of hay and meat. That morning, Aaron had arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark, the owner, had left the previous evening to visit his sister, reminding Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time. The next day, Mark texted Aaron around 10, but received no reply. Assuming she was busy, he began his drive back. When Mark pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he saw the outer gate to Bruno's enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Then he heard screaming. He ran toward the sound and saw Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open. The bear's movements were methodical. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake. The noise drew Bruno's attention. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The impact knocked Mark flat. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, claws sinking deep. Aaron saw Mark try to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently, then adjusted his grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward to the open gate, collapsing near the outer fence. She heard Mark's shout, "Stop!" abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Mark had died from trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. Then there's the story of Johan in the Limpopo province of South Africa on August 19, 2017. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm. At Johan Boa's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, a large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, but this time would be different. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. He had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. Caretaker. Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johan took a broom and bucket toward the enclosure, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've often wondered what goes through an animal's mind in those final moments. In 2013, at a lodge, a worker named Jan casually approached a lion enclosure. What followed was a stark reminder of the power and the inherent unpredictability of wild animals. It was a tragedy born of complacency, a preventable disaster that unfolded in horrifying detail. Jan entered the enclosure, sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly. Another worker, fascinated by Jan's calmness, filmed the scene. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then Simba, the lion, began to circle, his tail flicking sharply. His behavior changed rapidly. He lowered his head, crouched, and then he lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward, his broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around Jan's shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled, pushing against the lion's muzzle. But Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Jan's neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan toward the shade, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried to roll onto his back, kicking at the lion's chest. But the animal's weight crushed his ribs. He tried to use the broom handle as a wedge, but it snapped. Another employee threw water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient, final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded. One worker ran to the control hut to sound the alarm. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. When the lion turned toward them, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba collapsed beside Jan. Jan's clothing was torn and soaked with blood. The autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite movements confirmed a single, sustained attack. The lodge closed. Simba was euthanized and his remains sent to a veterinary pathology lab. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. The property was sold, and the lion enclosure was sealed for good. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a weathered tin awning, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, 2 chimpanzees made sharp, uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined, precise, with a fascination for animals. After retiring, she invested her savings in an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130 pounds, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are incredibly strong, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds. Their jaws are capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 100 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression, especially when agitated or competing for dominance. Captivity often amplifies these instincts. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty panhoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I've always been haunted by the image of a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, despite attempts to wash it clean. It was April 17th, 2015, a bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois, when a roadside zoo became the site of a tragedy that would leave such a stain. A day when a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. Yellow school buses pulled into the parking lot of the small private animal park. Families with strollers mixed with school groups. Teachers with clipboards struggling to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow moat lined with algae. A hand-painted sign warned, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside the enclosure, 2 adult males and 1 younger female lived together among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture stains, and the enclosure looked outdated compared to the modern habitats I've seen in larger, accredited zoos. Matthew Collins, a bright but impulsive 12-year-old, was there on a spring field trip. His teachers said he liked to climb trees, rooftops, anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, hoping to get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. Matthew, wanting a better angle, stepped onto the lower rail for balance. He ignored classmates who motioned for him to stop, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in frame, his foot slipped. He dropped over the rail and into the pit below, landing hard on his right side. From above, teachers screamed his name. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then, one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. I can only imagine the chilling sounds that visitors described. Deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The two chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite, but a dominance blow. A sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper heard the commotions and ran toward the enclosure, grabbing a hose from the maintenance shed and spraying into the pit. The high-press stream broke the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating, as keepers threw fruit, and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt. That same day, but sometime later, at a private home, another attack unfolded. Linda, a woman known for her gentleness and curiosity, tried to crawl toward the gate, blood pooling beneath her. Buddy grabbed her by the hair, dragging her back. He bit her neck once, then again, each time slower, deliberate. Her body stiffened, then slackened. Rosie backed away slightly, lips curled, hands trembling. The attack lasted less than a minute, but to Tom it stretched endlessly. The sound of skin tearing, replaced only by his own shouting. By the time deputies arrived about 10 minutes later, the yard was silent. The chimps stood near the body, panting. Buddy had blood on his hands and chest. Rosie sat beside the gate, rocking slightly. Officers attempted to use tranquilizers, but Buddy charged the fence, snapping at the air. A deputy then fired 2 rifle rounds through the bars, hitting him in the chest and neck. Both animals fell inside the enclosure, their bodies still twitching, when Tom was led away by paramedics. Deputies found Linda near the center of the cage. She had suffered massive trauma, scalp avulsion, facial disfigurement, and multiple fractures. Her pulse was gone before help arrived. Investigators noted that the outer gate had not been locked, a lapse in Linda's usually strict routine. Tom refused interviews and moved away within months, leaving the house empty and the enclos to rust behind tall weeds. At the funeral, held quietly in a mobile chapel, a few former co-workers attended. They remembered Linda as gentle and curious. But behind the condolences lingered a shared disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclos was later dismantled, leaving only that bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, where the hose couldn't wash everything away. There are moments when the line between the wild and the domestic blurs with devastating consequences. I remember reading about a tragedy in Connecticut, a story that still haunts me. It began on a seemingly ordinary afternoon, June 11th, 2014, in a quiet neighborhood in Stamford. But behind the trimmed lawns and neat rows of houses, something unimaginable was about to unfold. Inside one of those homes lived Belinda Holmes, a 57-year-old woman known for keeping a very unusual companion, a chimpanzee named Charlie. She had raised him from infancy, treating him like a human child, despite state laws forbidding such ownership. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle, a curiosity. But there were warning signs, whispers of the wildness that still resided within him. By the time Charlie was 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. Belinda struggled to control him when he was upset, but she always insisted he was gentle. But living with a chimpanzee leaves marks. The furniture was scratched, the air carried a musky scent, and on that warm June day, with the windows open, Charlie grew restless. He began to pace, his agitation building despite Belinda's attempts to calm him. Years of human companionship couldn't erase his fundamental nature. When a chimpanzee is stressed, its aggression can surface with terrifying speed. Months before, Charlie had escaped and chased cars, pounding on a vehicle. State officials had warned Belinda about the illegality of owning him, but she ignored them. Friends noticed Charlie's growing irritability around strangers, but Belinda brushed it aside. That afternoon, his agitation boiled over. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, showed his teeth. When Belinda moved to grab his arm, the attack began. Charlie lunged, slamming her backward onto the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbors heard the screams and the crashing furniture through the open windows. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to defend herself. Blood pooled on the carpet as he continued the assault. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her, then bit into her forearm, breaking the bone. Her screams brought neighbors running. One man peered through the window and recoiled in horror. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. They called 911, their voices shaking. Police arrived within minutes and heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window, and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. They fired multiple shots. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely alive, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. She was airlifted to a trauma center with critical facial injuries and severe trauma to both hands, requiring amputation, as well as massive blood loss. Investigators documented the scene afterward. The flipped furniture, the blood-splattered walls, Charlie lying where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. I will never forget reading about Belinda, whose life was forever altered. Her screams, witnesses said, would stay with them forever. After multiple surgeries, she survived, but was left disfigured and needing constant care. That case, as terrible as it was, did at least spark national attention and led to stricter laws regarding exotic animals as pets. Now I want to tell you about another incident, one that happened on May 28, 2017, just outside of Austin, Texas. It was Memorial Day, and a few families had gathered for a barbecue at a privately rented picnic site along a bend of the Colorado River. It was a quiet spot, grass bordered by live oaks and open water. Cars lined the dirt access road, children played near the grills, and the afternoon heat shimmered off the water near the tables. But one guest had brought an animal that most people only ever see behind glass. The victim was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He lived nearby, ran the trail most weekends, and met friends for cookouts. He was known for his thoughtfulness, always bringing extra water and sunscreen. That day, he'd finished a 5-mile run and stopped by the gathering after a friend texted him about the barbecue. He noticed the small crowd near the tables and walked over, curious. Daniel had good reason to feel comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping calm, anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance, staying behind a low trash can. The chimpanzee wore a harness, and the owner talked with onlookers, handing out small pieces of fruit. Daniel wanted one clear photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he saw on a normal Sunday. He moved forward a few feet, holding his phone out, angling for a clean shot past the cluster of people. The scene was ordinary in every other way. The chimp shifted constantly, pacing a small circle on the leash, sniffing the air and reaching toward anything held too close. A thin musk drifted downwind, mixing with charcoal smoke. Adult male chimpanzees, you see, are not really suited for public gatherings. In social groups, dominance is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling don't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and food competitions can bring them to the surface in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin limits, but this site lay just beyond municipal oversight. Few people at the event realized the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple near the front stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a bright red cup. The owner shortened the leash but kept feeding it bits of fruit. A runner passing along the dirt road called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle so he could take one steady shot. The tension increased. Children clustered too close. Then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet forward, to avoid another person's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a beat, everything held still except the wind. Then the lunge covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm just below the elbow, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip didn't loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams rose from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll and get his feet under him, but the chimp climbed up his torso and hammered his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung one arm without looking and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel every time teeth met bone. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out within seconds, yet the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had been made that day. I've always found the intersection of human ambition and the animal world to be a source of both wonder and profound sadness. I remember reading about a chimpanzee attack that occurred on September 14, 2018, in Los Angeles. The details haunted me for days. It was supposed to be a simple animal demonstration for a daytime talk show, filmed at a small independent production studio. But the press of lights, heat, and unfamiliar faces proved too much for the chimpanzee. Kevin Harris, an experienced animal trainer, had spent 2 decades building his career on patience and gradual conditioning, teaching wild species to tolerate human environments. This TV appearance was just another paycheck, another chance to promote his business. The chimp, a 13-year-old named Mike had worked with Kevin since he was an infant. At 125 pounds, Mike was fully mature, strong, intelligent, and, when stressed, unpredictable. The handlers knew that adulthood changes everything. Males that once tolerated crowds often grew volatile once dominance instincts sharpened with age. The set was modest, a sofa, coffee table, and backdrop beneath studio lamps. Mike sat on a stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash, shifting constantly, tugging at the strap, scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing stress behaviors, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight. Kevin reared everyone, offering Mike small pieces of banana to settle him. As recording began, the room brightened under the lamps. The host smiled for the opening shot. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then, the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore muscle and tendons clean through. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder, another blow with his fists. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes and tranquilized Mike on sight. Kevin survived, but barely. Surgeons documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. It makes you wonder about our place in the world and our relationship with these creatures. I recently read about another incident, this one taking place on October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. I've always been drawn to the stark intersection of human ambition and the raw power of the natural world. Sometimes that meeting ends tragically. I remember reading about a photographer named Martin, driven by the desire for a unique image, who ventured into a place where the boundary between observer and observed blurred with deadly consequences. He was looking for chimpanzees near a mountain road in Africa. What he found was a brutal reminder of the wildness that still exists, even at the edges of our paved roads. Martin, an experienced photographer of gorillas and monkeys, was driving along a road, hoping to capture a chimpanzee against the backdrop of the landscape. He parked near a bend and started walking along the shoulder of the road. A local motorbike rider shouted something at him, gesturing towards the trees. But Martin waved back, seemingly more concerned about the speeding trucks than the animals. The highway is through green ridges, the vegetation pressing close. Chimpanzees sometimes appeared along these margins, easily climbing across embankments or descending into the ditches. Rangers often warned tourists to stay in their vehicles, and locals avoided walking alone, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told as much at his lodge, but he dismissed the warnings, believing his experience with gorillas would keep him safe. A few minutes into his walk, he spotted movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, two smaller chimps behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting. Martin kept snapping photos, zooming in, stepping into the lane, unaware the chimp was climbing down. It all happened in seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt and charged. The impact knocked Martin backward, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. The first bite tore into his forearm. A passing motorbike rider shouted in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled him, striking his head. Another bite tore into his shoulder. The younger chimps briefly appeared, hooting, before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, biting his ear and jaw. People tried to help. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely noticed. A truck slowed, its horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking him violently. The sounds were terrible. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The attack lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp finally released him and retreated into the vines, blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless, his clothes torn and soaked. He was lifted onto a truck flatbed and rushed toward town, but he lost consciousness within minutes. He was declared dead on arrival at the hospital. His camera bag held the last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and a blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.